Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of My Bigfoot Sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sightings have happened in several states spanning the course of many years. It first started in New York in December of 2012. My car had conveniently broken down the day after Christmas, and since I was closing the local convenience store, I could not find a ride home at midnight. So I decided, since it was not snowing, it had snowed the day before, that I would walk home. It was only a couple of miles, and I didn't mind. Well, the one road that I took to go home bordered a state forest, and I used to walk that road during the day many times, so I knew it quite well. And this one particular night, as I'm walking home and I'm nearing the state forest, I hear something walking next to me in the woods. And at first I thought it was my imagination, so I kind of ignored it. And then I'm thinking, well, maybe it's the echo of me walking, and then I looked down and noticed that there's really no snow on the road crunching under my feet as I walked. So I paused for a second to see if I could hear it, and I heard nothing. Whatever was following me stopped when I stopped. I was a little taken back at this at first. I wasn't sure what to think, thinking, okay, I worked a 9-hour shift. I'm tired. It's my imagination. So I started to walk again. And as I started to walk, I heard whatever was following me start walking again, crunching in the snow. And I'm going through my mind all the things that it could be. Is it a deer? No, it sounds too heavy to be a deer. Is it a bear? Well, it's December in New York. Bears are hibernating. It can't possibly be a bear. Is it a mountain lion? Well, according to the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, mountain lions are extinct in New York. Well, I have seen mountain lions in New York, so I know that that's not true. So I'm thinking, okay, it's a mountain lion. I'm dead. So I stopped to listen to see if I can figure out where exactly this thing is. And as I stopped, it stopped. I start walking again, and it starts walking again. And I'm listening, and it's not a quadruped. I've worked with horses for many years, so I know what a quadruped sounds like. 4 feet, 4 paws. And this sounded like it had 2. And I'm thinking, there is somebody following me with big boots on in the snow, and they're going to murder me. So I start walking a little quicker. Well, whatever's following me now starts walking quicker. I stop, it stopped. Now I'm really panicking. I don't know what's behind me. I don't know what's following me. It sounds like it's coming closer to me. Well, I think I ran 2 miles in about 2 minutes. I was terrified. So the next night, my car's still broken down, couldn't find a ride. I decided I'm not taking that road next to the state forest. There's no way. I don't want to get involved in whatever animal is out there. I don't want to get eaten. I'm going to take the long road. So I take this long road back home, and I get to about 2 miles from my house, and there's an S-turn kind of going up this hill. And as I near the top of the S-turn on this hill, I hear this big branch snap. And I'm like, what the heck? And I stop in my tracks, and I'm waiting to see this tree fall, this branch fall. And I don't hear anything anymore. And just as I start walking again, I hear this crack where another branch is broken or a tree is fallen down. And it's not windy. It's not snowing. There's no snow on the trees. I ran home again. I probably did another 2 miles in 2 minutes. So the next day I go to work and I'm pleading with my one coworker, hey, can you please give me a ride home? The last 2 nights I've had some animal chase me and I'm terrified. I can't do this again. I don't know what's going on. My car won't be ready till tomorrow. Is there any way you can give me a ride? And my coworker says, sure, describe what's happened to me. I'd like to hear your story. So I tell her the story that I just told you guys, where something followed me and then the sticks breaking. And she goes, oh, honey, that was a Bigfoot. You're okay. And I'm thinking, there is no Bigfoots in New York. Those things don't exist. You are out of your mind. And she goes, no, they're real. And the state forest that you walked through the night before, my boyfriend and I in August were setting up targets to sight in our rifles prior to deer season. And as we're setting up our targets, we get this really pungent odor coming at us. And we didn't think anything of it at first until little pebbles started getting thrown at us. And the more we started setting up stuff and ignoring these pebbles, the bigger the pebbles got. So we left. And as my friend is telling me her story, I'm thinking, well, maybe there is something to this. Maybe there is a Bigfoot in New York. And I kind of brushed it under the table and kind of forgotten about it. And then November of 2013, on Thanksgiving, I'm not working at the convenience store anymore. I've moved locations. I'm now working at a horse ranch at the base of the Catskill Mountains in New York. And I go in about 3 o'clock in the morning to feed the horses so that I can travel to my Thanksgiving dinner. And we had some coyotes that lived in the woods near us. I mean, we had hay fields, apple orchards, you name it. I mean, it was rural New York. So I'm feeding the horses, and at one stage, the coyotes start going crazy. I don't think anything of it. Usually you hear them early morning, late at night. I've even seen them walking through one of the horse pastures. And then came this howl. This blood-curdling screech howl. Something I've never heard before. And I'm stop and listen, and as I stop and listen, I noticed the barn dog ran from the driveway with his tail tucked between his legs into the barn. Everything was dead silent, and I mean dead silent. There was no birds, there was no nothing. The coyotes went silent, everything went quiet. And I'm listening, and the horses are like freaking out. So whatever howled, they didn't like. So I'm sitting in the barn, kind of peeking out around the barn doors, because at this stage I'm completely terrified yet again. And after probably about 20 minutes, the coyotes started up again, and the horses started, wandering out and eating, and the barn dog peered out from behind me. So I didn't think anything of it. But I'm like, what is this howl? What was it? I tried doing a search on the internet, but I couldn't find anything that matched the howl. I'd looked everywhere, couldn't find anything. So a couple weeks later, I'm getting ready at the barn with my horse, my friend Judy, going to go for a trail ride. And it's about 8 in the morning. And it's just as we're getting on our horses, we hear this howl. And it's the same howl I heard back on Thanksgiving. And I look at her and she looks at me and we're both, what the heck was that? We couldn't figure out what it was. Wasn't anything we've ever heard before in New York. Wasn't a coyote, wasn't a bird, wasn't an owl. We don't know. So now I've heard this howl twice. I had this experience the December prior. Now I'm really confused. What is it that I'm hearing? What is it that I'm feeling? And I start really researching it. And I come across an article about Whitehall, New York, and how they had all these Bigfoot sightings back in the 60s and 70s. And I'm like, okay, Whitehall's only 3 hours from me. Maybe there is something to this Bigfoot thing in New York. So I start researching. And eventually I do come across an audio file that supposedly had what people were calling the Sasquatch sounds from the Sierra Mountains that Ron Moorhead had done. And as I'm listening to this recording, it sounds very similar to the 2 howls that I had heard. And I'm like, well, maybe it is a Bigfoot. maybe there is something to all this. So I find this website for the BFRO where they do expeditions and Bigfoot hunts and everything. And I signed up for one in Oregon. So I drive from New York to Oregon for my very first Bigfoot expedition, and I don't know what to expect. And we weren't disappointed. We had heard knocks. We had found what I thought was very interesting, a stick that was stuck next to a kind of a deadfall tree that was a few inches into the ground, probably about 4 or 5. The overall length of the stick, about 4 or 5 inches into the ground, probably about 18 inches total length. So it kind of gave us the impression that maybe something was using this stick to make calls with, the wood knocks, and was leaving it there for future use. Now, I didn't really see anything on this first expedition, but the wood knocks and a few of the vocalizations, and we had one guest stay back in camp one night and had a huge rock thrown at him. Another couple that was camping with us that night actually had their trailer kind of bumped by something. Another guy was having twigs thrown at his hammock. So there was these little things, but I didn't see anything that really screamed Bigfoot. So I go back to New York after this expedition, and now I'm curious. What is this that everybody's experiencing? What is this that they're seeing? I want to see it too. I want to see this thing. Yeah, I'm an amateur zoologist. I've studied nature for my entire life. 6-year-old kids growing up, they're watching He-Man and their Ninja Turtles. I was watching Wild America. Nature is my life. So I get back to New York, and lo and behold, they're having an expedition in Whitehall, New York. Well, I remember reading about Whitehall, New York. So this is my second expedition trying to find Bigfoot. And in Whitehall, the first 3 days of the expedition, it rained. And I mean rained. It poured. We saw nothing. The fourth day, we went hiking. And me and this other gentleman, and I forget what his name was, we got this brilliant idea to climb up on this hill overlooking the river. And when we got to the top of the hill, the strangest thing we found, there was a tree that had fallen down, and my best guess was it fell down during the rainstorm from the last 3 days. But the leaves on the other half of the tree weren't torn, they weren't ripped, they weren't eaten. They were plucked off the tree and laid on the ground on the side of the tree that still had leaves. Like something made a bed. And I thought that was very interesting, because I don't know any animal in New York State that could do something like that. That's kind of lends to the thing of dexterity. Like you'd have to have thumbs or fingers to be able to pluck leaves like that without ripping them. Well, we kind of went down off the hill and wandered around and didn't really see anything. So I made friends with this one gentleman. His name was Kevin. And in December, we had a pretty good snow the same year. So we decided we're going to go up to Whitehall. If there is something with this Bigfoot thing, with the fresh snow, maybe we can find tracks. Maybe we can find its cave, find out where it lives. So Kevin and I get up there about 6 o'clock in the morning. And we hike around this one area next to the river. We don't see any caves. We don't see much of anything. So we turn around about noonish, and we start heading back to the car. And it was an L-shaped road. You went down, and then you made a hard left to go out into this meadow along this hill. Well, coming back, you made the hard right and then went up the hill back to where we parked the car. And just as we were hitting that hard right to head up the hill, I noticed something had moved in the meadow below. And it was kind of hiding behind a group of trees. And I couldn't figure out if it was a bear, a deer, a human. I couldn't figure out what it was. So I told Kevin, hey, stay here. Keep an eye on that set of trees. I'm going to walk up the hill a little further so I can get a better angle on it. Maybe we can get a picture or video, something. And as I get to the top of this hill, which probably is a good, 20 meters from where Kevin was standing, I turn and look at the meadow, and this creature, kind of ran from this one group of trees to the other. And the two groups of trees, I estimate, were about 60 feet apart. Now, the snow that was on the ground was about knee-high on me, so about 18 inches. And this thing covered 60 feet with 18 inches of snow in 3 steps. I don't know a person that could have done that. And because the sun was behind us, it was noon. It was daylight sighting with white snow. I don't think it was a person because it was too big and burly. There was no snoot, no ears, no tail. So it wasn't a bear, and it didn't even move like a bear. It kind of moved like a person would. And I'm watching this thing going, I can't believe what I'm seeing. I just can't. So I motioned to Kevin to kind of come up towards me. And as Kevin's walking towards me, this thing makes it to this second group of trees and squats down, like ducks down like something's shooting at it. But by this time, Kevin has come up to where I'm standing, and I'm pointing to where I see this thing. And he's looking, and I'm looking, and we're watching to see if it moves again. Now, as we're watching this meadow, this group of trees, to see what this thing is, what it's doing, there's something on the top of the hill that's kind of not happy with us at this stage. We can hear sticks breaking, we can hear something moving, and we can start to hear a low growl. Now, we're more focused on the meadow than anything. We're kind of ignoring what's behind us until it let out this blood-curdling, almost a lion-type growl. And we turn to see what this is, expecting to see a mountain lion ready to pounce on us. Now, as Kevin and I turn and look up the hill, whatever was in the meadow, whatever was behind that group of trees, ran to the river. You heard 4 distinct splashes where it crossed the river, and then it was gone. We never saw it again. It never made a peep. The thing that was behind us, you could hear crashing through the trees and the snow. It must have made its way back up the hill. So at this stage, Kevin and I are like, well, we can't go up the hill after it. It's too slick. There's too much ice, too much snow. We'll never make it. It's too dangerous. So we stood there waiting to see what would happen. And it started getting cold. About 2 o'clock, we're about ready to call it quits. Now, whatever crossed the river decided to howl and call its buddy. Because we heard this weird moaning howl. And not a minute later, whatever was on the hill answered back. Because it was kind of like one of those, hey, George, I'm over here. All right, Fred, I'll see you later. And it was just the strangest thing. And the howl sounded like what I've heard before in the Catskill region of New York on that Thanksgiving morning, and then a few weeks later with my friend Judy. So I'm like, did I really just see a Bigfoot? Is this what I'm witnessing? And Whitehall, New York became my favorite spot after that for the next couple of years. And I would go up there with my friend Kevin, my friend Mike, and a few other researchers that I'd met over the years. I've done a few expeditions up there. And we ended up bumping into a family. And I will keep them private because they want to keep their location private, their property. And we got talking with this family, and they have over 30 years of documented Bigfoot sightings on their property. One of the stories they told was he was getting home from work one night. It was twilight, right about harvest time, so like August, September, he thinks it was. And he sees the silhouette of something bent down in his garden, like hunched over, bent down in the garden. Well, he thought it was his wife at first. So he gets out of the car and he starts walking over and he's screaming at his wife. Well, his wife comes out of the house going, who are you yelling at? And when he looks over at the garden, whatever was bent down is walking away from him, kind of a dark brownish, blackish color. It was almost dark, almost twilight, dark. So he didn't really get a good look at what color it was, but it walked over to the woods and kind of disappeared. And he said when his son was little, he was went to go fishing at the pond that they had on their property. And when he walked up to the pond, he noticed there was something peeking at him from behind a tree. And 20 feet away was this female Sasquatch. And he knew it was a female because he could see the breasts on this thing. And the kid was I don't know, he was 9 years old. He dropped his fishing pole, ran screaming for the house for Mommy and Daddy. So as we're talking to this family and they're telling us all these stories of this Bigfoot there, we asked them, hey, can we do a private expedition? Just me, Mike, and Kevin. We'll go up there. We'll just do a weekend thing. We want to see if there's anything on your property. And the owner was very, very accommodating. He's like, yeah, I need someone to validate, what we're seeing. And it's just, I don't know what to do. So we go up and it's a weekend in October. And the first couple hours we're there, there's not much going on. You see some turkeys, some deer. And we decide to go for a hike around the property. Don't see anything. And we decide to drive around to the backside of the property. Now there's this meadow there, and there's this big deadfall tree in the middle that was kind of a whitish gray. So we know that it's there. It's daylight when we're driving, so we see it. So we go back, we make dinner, we wait till it gets dark, we decide to go out again. Now we drive around to that meadow at the back side of the property, wanting to see what we see. We get out of the car and we start walking, and we notice that there's 2 stumps now in the middle of this field. And I'm looking at Kevin, Kevin's looking at Mike, and we had the gentleman's son with him. And he's looking at us, and we're like, was there 2 stumps here before? Or was it just the one? And as the 4 of us now are arguing back and forth whether there was 2 stumps or 1, the second stump stood up and walked down the hill. I jumped so high, I almost landed on the gentleman's son and flattened him. Mike screamed like a little girl, and Kevin was like, oh my gosh. And it was just the weirdest thing. And we're like, okay, we just saw something. We stood there for a minute trying to see if we could hear where it went, see if it was coming back. And we're like, well, it's heading in the direction of the property. Let's go back there and see what happens. So we drive back to the property and we start walking, and we get to about the midway of this gentleman's property. And we see eyes, like the reflection of eye shine. Now, I don't believe in eye shine bioluminescence in mammals. It's not documented. It's probably not even physiologically possible. But if you look at primates, lemurs actually are the only primate that have structures within the retina of the eye to be able to shine and reflect light back. Ape-like primates, your gorillas, your bonobos, your chimps, your humans do not have this ability. Well, there was something that had some glowing eyes looking at us in the backside of this property. And it was kind of playing peekaboo behind a tree. Now, I remember on our drives and our hikes that there is a lamp post back there, a street light. But the way this thing was moving, playing peekaboo behind this tree, it could not have been a reflection from a lamppost with the trees moving and everything. And we watched this thing for 15 minutes before it finally, whatever it was, disappeared. Now, the next day, we went back out to that same location in the daylight. And whatever it was that was there with the eyes actually flattened out some of the ground and some of the leaves behind this tree. Like, it was completely flat where it was standing. Now, the only thing that can do that would have to weigh a couple 100 pounds and be kind of fidgety with its feet if it's gonna flatten the ground and crush the leaves like this. So we stayed for another night, didn't hear anything, didn't see anything. And I ended up moving away just shortly after that. I left Whitehall, I went to Oregon. In Oregon, I started having other experiences with Bigfoot. There was one expedition I was on where there was 3 of us. We had 2 logs that made an L shape. I was sitting kind of in the middle of the L. I had a female friend on one end and a male friend on the other. And we're sitting by this pond. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. And it's been quiet. There hasn't been a single peep, not even a frog. It's been dead. And just as we're talking, thinking about getting up and leaving and going back to camp, here comes this rock, and it hits the tree next to us. And we look at each other and we're like, did we just hear that? Are we all hallucinating? Was that just something hit? And we stop. We get dead silent. We don't speak. And all of a sudden, here comes this rock, and it hits the log that I'm sitting on, kind of between me and this other female. And the male that we were with kind of looked at me, and I looked at this other girl, and I'm like, yeah, it's time for us to leave. Rocks are getting thrown at us kind of close. It's time for us to leave. We're done now. And that was actually a good trip. There was actually one guy who was parked. We were camping at the edge of a quarry. One guy was kind of parked at the edge, and something hit his vehicle one morning and dented his hood pretty good. It was about an 8-inch dent, 8 inches across. It was about an inch deep. And considering there was a quarry, there was no trees around, it couldn't have been a branch or something that hit. So we were thinking that maybe it was a Bigfoot that hit. And I've been throughout Oregon. I've been through mostly Central Oregon. I've been through up by the Tillamook area. And I've seen and heard different noises that I couldn't explain. And I stayed in Oregon for about 4 years researching Bigfoot. And one case that came to mind that I just can't seem to explain was a coworker was telling me about a sighting that he had. And I went to the area. It was near the South Sister, or the Three Sisters Mountains, where he was hunting deer, and there was a little bit of snow, and he found these big tracks. And he followed them into a meadow, and they got to about halfway in the meadow and just disappeared. And he said the tracks were about 17 inches from toe to heel. Now, they could have melted a little bit with the sun, and that's why they were so big. But he said the weird part was it just stopped in the middle of the meadow. So I go out there to investigate, and we look at this meadow, and it's right next to a river. And as we're investigating this, I just get the feeling like I was being watched. And I'm talking to this witness, and we're going over things, and I'm like, well, was it windy that day? Did the snow drift blow and cover the other half of the tracks? And as we're talking, he's like, I don't know. I don't think it was windy that day. We started getting little pebbles thrown at us. So we talked for a few more minutes, and the pebbles started getting bigger. So we leave. We start heading down the mountain, and you could feel that something was following us. So we get about, 3/4 the way down the mountain, and whatever was there started really throwing pebbles, and you could smell this putrid odor, like something was rotting. Well, whatever it was getting closer, and me and this witness decided we were going to beeline it back to the cars. And another instance that I had in Oregon that I'll share is I was the only female on an expedition for 2 days. Now, I've heard that Bigfoots like women, and they like children. They don't see them as a threat. The adult human males they do see as maybe a threat, a challenge, a rival. So when women or children are on expeditions, it seems like there's a lot more activity. So I'm the only girl, and there's 2 small children on this expedition. It's me and my friend and his family. Now, the 2 kids and the older, my friend's father, had gone to bed. So it was me and my friend Jeff. And we're sitting out by the fire, and he's seeing something moving in the trees in front of us. And I'm seeing something moving in the trees next to us. And we're aware that there's 2 things out there staring at us. Well, after watching this for a few minutes and realizing that they're kind of to the left of where we had our porta potty, the porta potty was about 50 feet behind me. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go to the porta potty before I go to bed and call it a night. And just as I stand up and go to walk past this pine tree to go to the porta potty, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. And I got this feeling like I do not want to walk past this tree. So I talked to Jeff, and I'm like, Jeff, come on. You have a thermal. Is there something here? Is there a bear, a mountain lion? I mean, we were so deep in the Ochiko National Forest that even the park rangers couldn't find us if something happened. Jeff gets his thermal, and sure enough, he scans over by this pine tree, and there's something playing peekaboo behind the pine tree. Well, I'm like, all right, Jeff, close your eyes. I'm going to use your truck. I'm going to go pee behind your truck. And I did, because I was terrified. Well, the rest of this expedition, anytime a female went near that porta potty, something was throwing sticks at it. And by the end of the expedition, on the one side of the porta potty, there was a nice little mound of little tiny, tiny twigs, probably about 3 or 4 inches long, where this thing was throwing them at the porta potty. Now, I didn't see anything except for this thing on thermal, and it was bipedal. It was standing up, and to me, it did not look like a bear. It looked like a big, burly guy wearing a huge hoodie. And that's not feasible, not for July, not in Central Oregon. It gets hot. So that was the first time I'd ever seen a Bigfoot on thermal. Well, I moved from Oregon. I went to Kentucky. Now, I know in Kentucky there's a lot of history of Bigfoot sightings. I'm only 15 minutes from the Daniel Boone National Forest. And Daniel Boone has had a sighting where he supposedly had shot and killed a Bigfoot after it was trying to hurt or injure one of his, I guess, team members or something. I don't remember the legend off the top of my head, unfortunately. So I live in central Kentucky, in the middle of nowhere. I am 45 minutes from the nearest town. I have cows on one side, a forest on the other, and a river behind me. I am in the middle of nowhere. Well, I came in October, and taking the dogs out early one morning, I hear some coyotes. I talked to my roommate that I'm staying with, and I said, hey, I heard coyotes last night. And she goes, oh, there's a den right in the holler next to us. Okay, so we got coyotes close. Interesting. So I keep hearing the coyotes taking the dogs out late at night, taking the dogs out early in the morning. I'd been in Kentucky for probably about a month. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm taking the dogs out, getting ready to go to work. I had to open the store that I managed that day. So I had to be there at like 7 o'clock in the morning. So I'm getting an early start. It's a 45-minute drive. I'm not sure of the area. I'm leaving early. And I hear the coyotes go nuts. And it's the same scenario as New York. The coyotes go nuts. All of a sudden, there's this one out-of-place howl. And then everything goes quiet. It goes dead. And I'm like, oh my God, they're here. The Bigfoots are here. And I listen. And I don't hear anything. So I put the dog back in. I get ready for work. It's now about 5 o'clock in the morning. Sun's just starting to come up. I walk out the door and I go to start my truck and I hear this one big howl. And it sounded very similar to what you would hear on the Sierra Sounds. This big moaning, curdling howl. And I pause. And I listen. And I don't hear anything after that. So I get in my truck and I start down the road. Now, probably about a mile down the road, there's this cornfield on the right. And it was recently harvested, so it's cut down pretty good. And it's dark. And I'm driving, and all of a sudden I see something moving in the corner of my eye in this cornfield. So I slow the truck down to almost nothing, thinking it's a deer. Well, just as my headlights hit it, it's not a deer. Something is walking in this cornfield, and it's on 2 feet. And I am driving very slowly, probably doing like 4 miles an hour, if that. And this thing walks down this hill through this cornfield into the woods and disappears. And I'm thinking, did I really just see what I think I just saw? Was that another Bigfoot? Because, dang. I stopped at this stage and I'm looking to see if it comes back. And I'm like, well, I can't stay here all day. I have to go to work. I go to work. I come back later that day. It's still semi-daylight. I pull over. I walk into this cornfield. And it's kind of muddy and sloppy, but you can see where there was tracks, where something was walking. And it was bipedal. It was two distinct footprints. You couldn't make out any details, but there was footprints going down this field. And I'm thinking, oh my stars, I must have just saw another Bigfoot. I drive back home, and for the next, I would say, month and a half, 2 months, so from November till about mid-January, every couple of days, the coyotes would go crazy, and then all of a sudden you'd hear this howl, and then it would stop. And then a couple of days would go by, you'd hear the coyotes one night late at night, and then you'd hear this howl, and it would stop. And it was like this till about January, and then it stopped. And there was nothing after that. And at work, a couple weeks later, I'm like talking to a coworker about seeing this thing and hearing this stuff in Kentucky, and I'm not used to it because, I've had experiences in Oregon and Michigan and New York. And he says, yeah, you should go down to this one road. And now, the lady who lives on this road, I'm not saying her name. She wants to be kept private. And she's right off of Lake Cumberland. Now, there's been some stuff on Facebook that I've seen where people were dressed in Bigfoot costumes and have sat on the lake. No, this lady legit has had footprints, sightings, everything on Lake Cumberland. I asked permission, and I went one afternoon, and I sat there for a few hours. And I had this eerie sensation like I was being watched. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And I would turn and I would keep looking, and I never saw anything, but I knew something was there. And just as I'm getting ready to leave, this rock that was about the size of a softball lands about 2 feet from my feet as soon as I stood up. Thank you. No, I'm going home now. That was too close for comfort. So I have had Bigfoot sightings in many states. Kentucky now, where I live, I'm waiting to have another one because it's been quiet for about 2 years now. And in my experiences, I have come to find out that Bigfoots usually have a pattern of sightings in a particular area where predators will have a territory and they'll wander their territory in search of prey. They don't stay in the same spot for very long. Prey animals, they'll graze an area, then they'll move on to another area. Graze that area, then move on to another area. Bigfoots have the same pattern. So since it's been 2 years, usually 3 or 4 years, you'll start seeing sightings. I'm actually anticipating more sightings and more activity on my property come this October of 2023. Until then, I continue to be out in the woods looking for Bigfoot, looking for Sasquatch, and just getting a feel for the area.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.